Meta spokesperson. Meta spokesperson. Furthermore, Meta. Plus Meta. New Mexico. The smartphone screen glows a sterile blue rectangle displaying the Instagram logo, and suddenly the digits flash. 567 million. A tremor runs through the digital transfer line. It is a verdict etched in luminous currency. Except this story doesn't end there. It forces an accounting of innocence and damage within the sprawling digital landscape of New Mexico. How much responsibility does Meta bear for the mental health crisis among New Mexico's youth? And what fundamental changes must it make to its platforms to truly mitigate harm? Meet Judge Brian Beidscheid. In Santa Fe, the air hangs thick and dry, smelling faintly of sagebrush and old vinyl upholstery as Judge Brian Beidscheid's gavel falls. A status quo, a world where Meta operated with a veneer of curated safety, is finally cracking under legal pressure. This long-running lawsuit wasn't just about bad posts or doom scrolling, it was a desperate fight for the very emotional stability of children caught in the algorithmic current. The call to adventure arrived not as a viral trend, but as an entrenched legal siege upon the corporation itself. The evidence presented painted Meta's platforms, Facebook and Instagram, less like helpful utilities and more like expertly engineered psychological traps. The jury saw past the corporate sheen. They saw genuine youth anguish. Then came the departure from the familiar defense posture. After weeks of intense cross-examination, Meta could no longer simply argue that users make choices. They were forced into the judgment phase, a moment where their reactive stance was replaced by an undeniable, punitive accountability. The initial financial hammer blow alone settled at $375 million. Deep within the corridors of the court, Judge Brian Beidscheid weighed these findings against the human toll. This wasn't just about fines, it was about redesigning the architecture of attention itself. He demanded more than mere monetary compensation for the pervasive harm Meta had facilitated. The trial's climax arrived when the mandate solidified. A colossal $567 million payment ordered, a seismic shift in corporate obligation. Yet this number is merely the ledger entry. The true upheaval lies in what that money must do. Specifically, a staggering $420 million is carved out, a designated sanctuary fund for treatment within New Mexico. This massive allocation ensures that the damage done to children's minds has a direct, funded lifeline back toward recovery and healing. The reward, therefore, isn't just the cash, it is the imposed structural reckoning. Meta must fundamentally alter its mechanisms of engagement, forcing them out of the realm of suggestion and into the realm of mandated care. The screen bleeds a harsh digital light onto the counter, the unmistakable glow of the Instagram logo. Below it, $567 million flickers, a colossal figure settling like dust motes in a stagnant air. This isn't just money, it's accountability made visible. How much responsibility does Meta bear for the mental health crisis among New Mexico's youth? And what fundamental changes must it make to its platforms to truly mitigate harm? Santa Fe, the granite facade of the courthouse feels heavy under the relentless high desert sun. Here, years of digital skirmishes have culminated in a single definitive order from Judge Brian Beidscheid. This verdict doesn't just slap a fine on the corporation, it demands a rewrite of its operating code. This lawsuit was more than litigation, it was an outcry from New Mexico itself. The surface problem is simple enough to grasp. Meta's platforms facilitated sexual exploitation and actively misled users about their safety. Beneath that headline, there burns a desperate need. The yearning for protection felt by every young face scrolling late at night. The system, which always seemed designed to favor the algorithm, was finally being challenged in this bellwether case. The state attorneys general brought forth evidence showing Meta wasn't just passive. It was an active participant in the decline of well-being among its youngest users. It came down to a stark confrontation. On one side, the corporate fortress defended by a sharp-suited Meta spokesperson. On the other, the immutable weight of justice presided over by Judge Brian Beidscheid. The question hanging thick in that Santa Fe air was this: could profit truly outweigh pervasive pain? Chapter 1, Anvil drops in Santa Fe. The ruling dropped like an anvil across the proceedings. Judge Brian Beidscheid ordered payment, a monumental $567 million judgment, but the narrative didn't end there. This financial penalty is merely the first stroke on a much larger, more intrusive canvas. That staggering sum is not simply being deposited into a general pot. A massive carving out of $420 million is designated specifically for treatment within New Mexico. The remainder fuels awareness campaigns, attempting to pull back the tidal wave of digital harm before it washes over another child. The finality of the order implies a shift in power. Meta, once capable of dictating terms unilaterally, must now operate under judicial mandate. This forces a reckoning, a profound acknowledgement that its product carries genuine, measurable weight on human souls. New Mexico burns bright under the desert sun, and on a screen within that light flashes $5 million, a colossal sum hanging over every scrolling thumb. How much responsibility does Meta bear for the mental health crisis among New Mexico's youth? This is not just about money, it's about the digital weight crushing young shoulders after endless feeds of manufactured happiness. In Santa Fe, the courtroom air hangs thick and dry, smelling faintly of old paper and ozone from overworked electronics. The jury has spoken its verdict on Meta, a declaration of guilt that settles deep into the bedrock of corporate arrogance. They found evidence proving the platforms had knowingly misled users about their own safety protocols. That monumental finding came courtesy of a separate judgment handed down in March, a specific punitive measure totaling $375 million. This figure is not arbitrary, it's the measured cost of deception, the price tag slapped onto years of unchecked algorithmic influence over vulnerable minds. This legal battle isn't an isolated skirmish, it is, rather, a bellwether event, the first shot fired in what promises to be a sustained barrage against Meta by state attorneys general across the country. The single case sets the tone for dozens more to follow. Chapter 2: Beyond the Fine Symptom. The financial penalty, that $375 million fine, is merely the visible symptom of the disease. The deeper infection is the systemic failure to protect kids scrolling through Instagram and Facebook late into the night. Why did they let this happen? Because Judge Brian Beischai's ruling demands more than just a monetary slap on the wrist. It carves out a dedicated reservoir, a staggering $420 million earmark specifically for treating those New Mexico youth who have been profoundly harmed by these digital landscapes. The specific allocation dictates that nearly half of the total judgment is tethered directly to healing. The remaining balance, what's left of the $567 million pie, must then be marshaled toward public awareness initiatives designed to build firewalls against future digital harm. Thus, Meta is forced into a new calculus. They cannot merely react anymore. They must actively fund and legislate their own culpability. They are shifting from being the unchallenged architect of online experience to being a highly scrutinized fiduciary for the well-being of New Mexico's youth. A smartphone screen flares to life, the familiar blue hue of the Instagram logo burning against the dark glass. Overlaid, stark and impossible, is the number 567 million transferring, an avalanche of capital destined for a crisis fought in New Mexico. How much responsibility does Meta bear for the mental health crisis among New Mexico's youth? Except this story doesn't end there. The forces are reckoning that demands a fundamental change to the code itself. In Santa Fe, the air inside the courthouse is thick with stale coffee and banked anticipation. A surface problem, the deception regarding safety, had been laid bare before a jury watching intently. But beneath that mechanical failure of transparency pulsed a deeper fear, the desperate need for validation in an algorithmically controlled world. The pivotal moment arrived in March, when those jurors delivered their verdict, hammering down a separate financial blow, $375 million. This wasn't just pocket change. It was a systemic admission of guilt regarding Instagram and Facebook's failure to protect its young users from sexual exploitation. Judge Brian Beischai, presiding over the proceedings, did not stop there. His official opinion served as a thunderclap, declaring that Meta is officially a public nuisance. This label, heavier than any fine, framed the company not as a service provider, but as an active drain on community well-being within New Mexico. Chapter 3: Platforms' Unique Liability. The weight of this judgment carried immediate consequences. It signaled that while Meta wasn't alone in this battle against societal harm, its platforms were undeniably a significant contributing factor to the pervasive mental health struggles plaguing youth. Be honest. If some part of you would have done the same thing, letting profit dictate paternalism, this verdict lands closer to home than it should. This case, lodged by state attorneys general, is not an isolated skirmish. It serves as a bellwether across the landscape. It's the first shot fired in dozens, suggesting that this legal pressure cooker is about to blow wide open across New Mexico and beyond. The gravity of this finding forces Meta into a stark new calculus. They can no longer merely react defensively when abuse is reported. They must actively fund mitigation and redesign their core architecture to fight the darkness. How does one quantify the value of peace of mind against shareholder dividends? Judge Brian Beischai's judgment therefore becomes the starting gun for forced evolution. Meta has been branded a nuisance by the highest authority in Santa Fe, demanding not just payment, but a fundamental restructuring of its relationship with the young people scrolling through their feeds. The smartphone screen glows, a sterile rectangle of light in the darkness, displaying the familiar, comforting curve of the Instagram logo. Then, it flickers, a digital scream, as the number $567 million floods the display, shimmering like spilled mercury. This is the price tag for carelessness. How much responsibility does Meta bear for the crushing weight of anxiety and despair gripping New Mexico's youth? The state court in Santa Fe has finally spoken. A jury delivered a verdict so heavy it feels like lead settling deep into the foundation of every family in New Mexico. They found not just negligence, but outright deception. They found facilitation, the digital doors left wide open to predators. Judge Brian Beachshide's opinion arrives, clinical and devastatingly precise. He confirms Meta is a public nuisance, a term that strips away the corporate varnish and exposes the raw liability underneath. This finding solidifies the argument. This isn't an accident, it's a systemic design flaw. Chapter 4. Punitive fine verdict lands. A separate verdict lands with its own metallic clang in March, a $375 million punitive fine levied against the company for failing to tell the truth about Instagram and Facebook's toxic glow. The system has been judged guilty by its own mechanisms. The evidence presented painted a horrifying portrait. Children scrolling through endless feeds found validation. But they also found shadows, the predatory gaze of sexual exploitation blooming across every sponsored post and tagged photo. This deception wasn't passive, it was active curation of risk. And the judge's mandates? They are surgical strikes against addictive design. Meta cannot send those insistent little ping notifications between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., silencing the digital siren call during crucial sleep hours. Even more aggressively, a hard cap is placed on usage. Youth users must be locked out after 90 hours in a single month. This isn't suggestion, it's enforced abstinence from the scroll. The weight of $567 million now rests squarely upon Meta's shoulders, forcing them to answer for every lost night's sleep and every spiraling mood swing among New Mexico's next generation. Santa Fe air hangs heavy and still, thick with the smell of petrichor rising from sun-baked adobe. On a nearby bench, an Instagram screen glows relentlessly, flashing notifications like frantic heartbeats against the dusty blue backdrop. A graphic overlay screams $567 million, a monolithic number representing lost potential and sleepless nights across New Mexico. This staggering penalty forces us to ask, how much responsibility does Meta truly bear for the mental health crisis gripping New Mexico's youth? The foundational problem is clear. Meta's platforms have been accused of more than just being present. They are actively complicit. The deeper struggle beneath the slick interface and algorithmic feed is a desperate yearning for safety, a need to feel seen, validated, without being perpetually manipulated by the endless scroll. In Santa Fe, Judge Brian Beachshide casts his verdict like an obsidian stone dropped into still water. His opinion doesn't just settle a fine, it labels Meta itself a public nuisance. The corporate behemoth has been formally charged with more than just poor programming. Its very existence in the public square is now deemed disruptive to the well-being of children. The trial evidence painted a grim picture, one where deception was not an anomaly but a design feature. These platforms weren't merely hosting connection, they were engineering dependency, chipping away at childhood resilience until only anxiety remained. Or how could the system possibly contain such pervasive influence? Chapter 5. Mandated structural changes deemed. This indictment immediately triggered mandatory structural changes. Judge Brian Beachshide decreed that Meta cannot bombard New Mexico youth with those insidious push notifications during the crucial hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Sleep, once a simple biological necessity, is now a legally mandated feature upgrade. Furthermore, the leash on engagement has been tightened considerably. The ruling demands a strict cap. Users must not be allowed to engage with Facebook or Instagram for more than 90 hours in any given month. 90 hours. A tangible ceiling placed upon digital addiction. The next layer of accountability requires transparency, a jarring contrast to Meta's usual curated secrecy. The platforms must now feature public awareness screens, constant reminders etched into the user experience explaining their child protection features and safety mechanisms. This entire legal gauntlet, culminating in Judge Brian Beachshide's firm decree, shifts Meta from a passive observer of youth distress to an active architect of its cure. They are now compelled, at least until appeal, to proactively engineer responsibility into the code itself. A stark flash across the screen, the familiar blue square of Instagram dissolving into the harsh white text. 567 million. The image burns itself onto your vision, mirroring the cold, relentless scrutiny bearing down on the digital giant. How much responsibility does Meta truly bear for the fractured minds and scrolling fingers of New Mexico's youth? Except this story doesn't end there. It ends with mandates etched in stone by a judge's gavel. In Santa Fe, the weight settles like fine alkali dust over the courtroom floor. Before this ruling, Meta operated under an illusion of control, believing its safety features were merely helpful suggestions rather than unbreakable laws. The deeper struggle here was never just about profit. It was the desperate plea from parents watching their children become trapped in a golden cage of curated perfection. The call to action solidified when Judge Brian Beachside delivered his final judgment, turning abstract digital harm into concrete liability for Meta. This departure, the official submission to this massive verdict, was not a surrender. It felt more like the start of a brutal redesign, forcing the company out of its comfortable operating theater and onto the public stage. Chapter 6: System Challenged by State. Then came the trials, the grueling cross-examinations where evidence piled up like digital debris. The system, designed to keep Meta buoyant, had instead been used as the platform for indictment, labeling them everything from deceptive operators to a veritable public nuisance in the eyes of the court. Can any corporation truly claim innocence when its architecture itself is part of the crime? The first mandated approach arrived with chilling specificity, no more predatory push notifications sneaking into the quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. for New Mexico youth. This was an attack on the sanctity of sleep, a direct confrontation against the algorithmic urge to keep eyes glued to the screen. But that wasn't all. The trial demanded further sacrifice. Furthermore, Meta must now adhere to a monthly usage cap, a hard ceiling placed squarely upon digital indulgence, limiting young users to just 90 hours each month. This quantified restriction is nothing short of technological restraint. Across the courtroom, a representative from Meta finally spoke, their voice tight over the sterile microphones. They issued a definitive statement: disagreement. The company vowed to appeal this monumental decree, signaling that this judgment did not represent the end, but merely the first violent shudder of its transformation. In New Mexico, as the verdict reverberates through the tech sector, Meta begins its reluctant return. No longer just an entity reacting to crises, it is now a legally constrained mechanism forced by Judge Brian Beachside's ruling to actively mitigate harm. A company that must prove through design change rather than mere marketing spin. But it values life over likes. The screen flickers, a cold, unforgiving blue overlaying the Instagram logo as 567 million flashes across the display like a digital shrapnel burst. This monumental judgment forces us to ask, how much responsibility does this monolith bear for the spiraling mental health crisis among New Mexico's youth? The initial defense was weak. Meta had claimed transparency, yet the underlying desperation of young users, those scrolling through feeds at 3 a.m. in Santa Fe, screams that promises are not proof. The surface problem demanded a staggering fine for facilitating sexual exploitation. The deeper wound is the need for validation against an algorithm designed to keep them tethered until exhaustion. Chapter 7: Must visibly educate now. Across New Mexico, Judge Brian Beachside's ruling solidifies this battleground. Meta doesn't just have to pay, it must visibly educate. The platform now requires public awareness screens, mandatory digital billboards explaining their own flawed child protection features. But even as the weight of that mandate settles, a corporate voice pushes back, a defiant shield against accountability. A designated Meta spokesperson issued a statement, not bowing yet, but bracing for impact. "We work hard to keep people safe on our platforms," the spokesperson declared, the phrase ringing hollow in the echoing halls of the courthouse. It is a tired refrain, a plea that sounds like boilerplate defense. This confidence hinges on their record, a shaky foundation built on incomplete data and convenient omissions. They claim transparency regarding the difficulty of removing bad actors, but how many harmful content pieces slip past those filters before this judgment? The $567 million penalty is merely the financial anchor. The real crisis lies in the enforced redesign. The system that allowed unchecked engagement must now be forced to advertise its own limitations, a profound admission of failure. Still, the fight isn't over. Despite the crushing weight of the ruling, Meta has signaled intent, a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They plan to appeal this judgment, determined to defend their operational freedom against these mandated structural changes. A close-up shot of a smartphone screen illuminates the dark room. The familiar Instagram logo glows, and an animated graphic sweeps across it, displaying $567 million transferring into a digital vault. This number is more than just capital. It's a judgment delivered against a titan, yet beneath the cold transaction lies a desperate plea for solace echoing from New Mexico's playgrounds. How much responsibility does Meta truly bear for the fragile mental health of these young souls tethered to its algorithms? In Santa Fe, the echo of that verdict rings through the polished marble halls of the courthouse. A surface problem, Meta's alleged deception about safety, feels almost too small against the weight of that 567 million figure. Yet, this colossal financial penalty is merely the symptom. A deeper ache is the raw vulnerability of New Mexico's youth facing a digital landscape designed to hook them tighter than an anglerfish lure. Chapter 8: Gauntlet Thrown Down by Judge. The trial itself was a gauntlet thrown down by Judge Brian Beachside. Evidence flooded in, snapshots of late-night scrolling, charts showing declining self-esteem, all pointing toward Meta's architecture as the primary culprit. Could they truly claim transparency when internal documents hinted at known vulnerabilities? In Santa Fe's courtroom, the defense mounted its final stand. A cool, practiced voice from a Meta spokesperson cut through the tension, arguing that their commitment to safety was genuine, despite the undeniable pitfalls of modern digital life. They fought tooth and nail against being labeled what they feared most: negligent stewards of the American teenager. But the verdict had already cast a shadow over those defenses. A separate tremor shook the foundation in California. A jury found Meta liable for one young girl's spiraling addiction, ordering $6 million to be paid as recompense. That was just one skirmish against a massive war. Back in New Mexico, that monumental ruling settles like dust on the mahogany desk of Judge Brian Beachside. The system has spoken, confirming the narrative. Meta wasn't just present, it was complicit. Now, structural mandates follow the monetary decree, a forced evolution demanded by justice itself. The crisis point is stark. $567 million must be paid, but that's not the endgame. Judge Brian Beachside has dictated specific operational handcuffs for Meta, including a mandatory ban on notifications between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., and crucially, limiting usage to only 90 hours per month. In Santa Fe, as the final pronouncements hang heavy in the air, the Meta spokesperson issued